The Shadow at Summer Camp. A scary story from Reddit. Subscribe to Scary Stories Vault for great videos to relax, study, or just enjoy. It was the summer of 2019. I remember the heat, the sticky air that clung to your skin, and a faint smell of pine trees that wafted through the breeze. My best friend Jess and I were on our way to a summer camp deep in the woods. It was one of those camps designed to keep teens like us away from our phones, to enjoy the great outdoors and connect with nature. At 16, neither Jess nor I were particularly enthusiastic about the idea of disconnecting from the digital world for 2 weeks, but our parents had already signed us up. So begrudgingly, we packed our bags and headed out for what was supposed to be a peaceful, phone-free retreat. The camp itself was set in a forested area outside a small town in the middle of nowhere. There wasn't much to see besides the occasional gas station, an old Walmart, and a diner that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. The drive there was long, and by the time we reached the Walmart for a supply stop, Jess and I were ready to stretch our legs and grab some snacks for the cabin. That's where we saw him. The man was tall, maybe in his late 50s or early 60s, with greasy gray hair that hung limply to his shoulders. He wore an old, faded flannel shirt that smelled faintly of cigarette smoke as he passed us. At first, we didn't think much of him. People like that were pretty common in small rural towns. But then, as we browsed through the aisles of snacks, we noticed him again. He was standing by the soda section, staring at us in this way that made my skin crawl. His eyes, deep, set, and dark, seemed to linger a little too long on Jess. "Do you know him?" I whispered to Jess, trying to shake the unease that was starting to creep up my spine. Jess glanced over and shook her head quickly. "No, he's probably just a local." I nodded, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. We hurried through the checkout line, eager to leave, and as we made our way back to the parking lot, the man was there again, leaning against the side of a beat-up pickup truck. He smiled at us, revealing yellowed teeth. "Headed to camp?" he asked, his voice raspy and low. I hesitated, but Jess, always the more social of the two of us, nodded and smiled back. "Yeah, we are. Just stocking up on snacks." He nodded slowly, his eyes flickering between us. "What's your names?" he asked casually, though there was something off about the way he asked, like he already knew the answer. Jess answered first. "I'm Jess, and this is my friend." She gestured to me, but I didn't offer my name. Something in my gut told me not to. The man's gaze lingered on me for a moment before he smiled again. "Well, enjoy your time at camp, girls." With that, he climbed into his truck and drove off, the sound of his engine fading into the distance. Jess shrugged it off, but I couldn't. Something about that man stuck with me, like a bad taste in my mouth. We arrived at camp later that afternoon, and for the first few days, things were normal. We spent our time hiking, swimming, and trying not to think about how much we missed our phones. The camp had a strict no-tech policy, which meant no phones, no internet, no social media, just nature and each other. It wasn't so bad once you got used to it, but still, I couldn't help but wonder what was happening in the outside world. A week into camp, everything changed. It started when we got our phones back for an hour one evening. The camp director had promised us this small privilege halfway through the camp as a way to reconnect with the world. Jess and I were excited to check our messages, scroll through Instagram, and see what we had missed. But when I opened my Instagram, there was a message request waiting for me. It was from an account I didn't recognize. No profile picture, no posts, just the name Jonadowan 123. I would have ignored it, but the message sent a chill down my spine. "Nice seeing you again. Have fun at camp." My blood ran cold. I stared at the message for a moment before showing it to Jess. Her face paled. "Do you think it's that guy from Walmart?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I knew she was right. It had to be him. I checked his profile, hoping to find some clue as to who this John Doe was, but there was nothing, just an empty account. Jess and I tried to shrug it off. Maybe it was just a prank, or maybe someone from camp was messing with us. But then the messages kept coming. The next day, Jess got one too. This time, the message was more specific. "Nice picture. The lake looks beautiful." It was an Instagram story Jess had posted before we went to camp. A picture of us by the lake, smiling and happy. But this man, whoever he was, wasn't supposed to know that. We hadn't told anyone where we were going. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe he'd seen our car and figured out we were headed to the lake. But as the days went on, the messages became more frequent, more detailed. He knew things he shouldn't have. He mentioned conversations Jess and I had had at camp, things we hadn't posted online or told anyone about. It was like he was there, watching us, listening to everything we said. Jess and I were terrified, but we didn't know what to do. There was no cell service at the camp, and the nearest town was miles away. Then, one night, we woke up to the sound of something tapping on our cabin window. At first, I thought it was just a branch or an animal, but the tapping was too deliberate, too rhythmic. I crept out of bed and tiptoed to the window, heart pounding in my chest. There, in the dark, was a figure standing just outside the window, his face obscured by the shadows. But I knew it was him, the man from Walmart, the man who had been stalking us. I stumbled back, waking Jess in the process. She bolted upright, her eyes wide with fear. "What's wrong?" "He's here," I whispered, my voice shaking. "The man. He's outside." We huddled together, too scared to move. Eventually, the tapping stopped and the figure disappeared into the night. But we knew he'd be back. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, we reported the incident to the camp counselors, but they brushed it off, saying it was probably just a prank or some local trying to scare the campers. Jess and I knew better. This wasn't a prank. This was real, and it was getting worse. When we finally left camp a few days later, we thought the nightmare was over, but it wasn't. The messages didn't stop. In fact, they got worse. The day we got home, Jess received a direct message from the same account. This time, it wasn't just a creepy message. It was a picture of her house, taken from outside her window. The caption read, "Missed you." That's when we knew we were in real danger. We contacted the police, but there wasn't much they could do. The account was anonymous, and the messages were just vague enough to be dismissed as a troll. But we knew it wasn't just some random internet troll. This was real. This was real. This man, whoever he was, had found us, and he wasn't going to stop. For weeks, Jess and I lived in constant fear. We kept our blinds closed, double-checked the locks on our doors, and tried to avoid going out alone. But the messages kept coming, and each one was more unsettling than the last. One day, I got a message that sent me over the edge. It was a picture of Jess and me at the camp, taken from the woods. We had no idea we were being watched at the time, but now looking at the picture, I could see him, just barely, lurking in the trees behind us. I broke down after that. We were both too scared to leave our houses, too scared to live our lives. We had become prisoners in our own homes, haunted by a man we barely knew. And then, one night, Jess disappeared. I had been texting her earlier that day, and everything seemed fine. But when I tried to call her that evening, she didn't pick up. I thought maybe she had fallen asleep or was busy, but the next morning, when I still hadn't heard from her, I knew something was wrong. I drove to her house, my heart in my throat. When I got there, her car was still in the driveway, but the house was eerily quiet. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Finally, I called the police, and when they arrived, they broke down the door. Jess was gone. Her room was a mess, her bed unmade, and her phone was left on the floor, shattered. There was no sign of a struggle, but I knew the man had taken her. The police launched an investigation, but there were no leads, no clues. Jess was just gone. It's been months now, and there's still no sign of her. I've stopped getting messages from the man, but I know he's still out there, watching, waiting. And every time I close my eyes, I see Jess. I see her smiling at me from across the campfire, blissfully unaware of the nightmare that was about to unfold. I see her laughing as we hiked through the woods, completely oblivious to the man lurking in the shadows. I haven't been back to camp since. I can't. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that man. I think about how easily he slipped into our lives, how easily he found us, and how easily he found us, and how easily he could find me again. And I wonder, as I lie in bed, staring at the darkness, when will he come for me?